Hello and welcome to Code Harvest. In this video, we are going to be making a very simple navigation bar that includes links that can trigger a drop-down menu. We will be working with HTML and CSS in order to design our navigation bar to look simple and neat, and we'll be working with JavaScript as well in order to create the drop-down menu toggle function, and we'll be creating everything from scratch without any external libraries or frameworks such as Bootstrap. This is a completely beginner-friendly tutorial, and we explain each line of code as we go, aiming to help you to understand not only what's added but also why and how it works. Now before we start, please subscribe to Code Harvest. We are so close to reaching 1,000 subscribers, which is pretty incredible, and I want to give a huge and big thank you to everyone who supported us along the way. And now, without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so now once you have already opened your code editor, we're going to be using Visual Studio Code for this video, and once you have included your HTML, you have created your HTML file, your CSS file, and included the basic document requirements such as the document type, the HTML tag, the elements, the language that you're going to be writing your code in, the CSS file, and body type, we're going to hop right in our nav element, and we're going to create our navigation bar in this nav element. So our nav element will be separated into three sections. The first section will include the logo, the second, which will be the middle, will include all of the links, and the third, which will be positioned on the right side, will include the button. Alright, so we're going to be creating three divs. So first we're going to assign this div to an ID called nav logo. Second one, we will assign this div to an ID called nav links, and the third one, I feel like we don't need to assign it to anything since the only thing that we're going to include is a button, which is going to be including one element, so I feel that it is not necessary for now. So we're going to start with our nav logo, and for this video we're going to be making a simple navigation bar, so we're not going to be including an image. We're just going to create a simple logo. However, if you are including an image, then all you need to do is include the image tag element and include two attributes. Most important two attributes is the first one, you include the file, basically where the image is stored in. If it's in the same directory, then you can just include the image file straight away. For example, it could be abc.png, or if it's in a different files, then include the folder first. For example, it could be in your images folder, or the name of the folder in which you have stored your image file in, and then we're going to and then you have to include an attribute called alternative text. So this is basically if the image has not been loaded yet, or there's some problems, the page was not able to load the image, then all you need to do is include a text basically showing or telling the user what the image was supposed to be displayed. So it could be ABC or any text that is relevant to the file basically. But we're going to be creating a simple nav for this video for demonstration purposes. So we're just going to create a div, and we're going to assign this ID to logo image, and then we're going to include a span element, and we're going to call our company or e-commerce A and Z. So this website that we're going to be creating is sort of like Amazon, so it includes different products, or it sells different products such as beauty, fashion, sports, home furniture, etc. So it's sort of like an Amazon type of website, so that's why we call it A and Z, though a more relevant name would probably be A2Z, but this sounded much more better. Alright, so now in our nav links, we're going to be including an unordered list. So this is where we're going to be including all of our list items, and in all of our list items, we're going to be including the links. So after we include the unordered list and list item, here now you can include the anchor tag, in which we will store the page in this attribute called href, which basically stands for hypertext reference. So whatever value that we include when the user clicks on the anchor tag, then it leads the user to that certain page that we are going to be defining. So since the first element is going to be home, or the first link is going to be home, we're just going to set this to index.html, and because this video only focuses on on the creation of a drop-down, we're just going to include hashtags as our href value for the rest. However, we're also going to be assigning our list item to a certain class, and we're going to call this nav link, because there'll be two types of link. There will be the links in the navigation bar directly, and there'll also be different links which will be stored in the drop-down menu basically. So now we're going to copy this and paste it for the other links. Alright, so now for this video we're going to be creating two links that will have drop-down menus. So we're going to be including another class again, and it's going to be for the products page as well as the services page. So when the user hovers around the products link or the services link, there should be a drop down shown where it shows for products, it shows the different products that the company sells or the e-commerce sells, and for services it should basically display the different services that the e-commerce provides. So now alright, so the class, another class that we're going to assign this list item to, we will call drop down link. So these two links will have this class. So in order to include a different class, you just add a space, no hyphen, no other character, just a space, or no dot, just a space. So we're also going to copy this and paste it for this one as well. Alright, so we're just going to change this to about, and another thing is we're just going to change these three links to a hashtag instead, which is a character that developers often use in order to basically replace the link that is supposed to be presented but has not been created yet. Alright, so now inside our drop-down links, we're going to be creating a new div, and we're going to assign this div to a class called dropdown. As simple as that. And we're going to be including a list. So in order to include a list, we first create the unordered list, which acts as a container for all of our list items. So we're going to be including anchor tags, and we're going to be including the href attribute, and we're going to be setting these href attributes to a hashtag since these links have not been created yet. Alright, so now the drop-down links have been created for our product section, so now we're going to move on to our services section, and it's basically just going to include not the same thing, but it's going to include the same elements. We're just going to change the name and include one more link. Alright, so now the links for the drop-down menu of services have also been created. So now the last thing that we're going to work on in our navigation bar in an HTML file is we're just going to be including a button, and we're going to be designing this in our CSS file. And since it is the only button in the navigation bar, we're not going to be including a class or anything like that or an ID. We're just going to call the nav element in order to access the button. So this button's text content will be start now. Alright, so now we are done with the HTML side of our navigation bar. So when we take a look at our page, we can see the logo. We haven't, of course, included the logo design yet. We have also included our links, our drop-down links as well, and our button. So now we're going to be designing our navigation bar in our CSS file so that it looks more like a modern navigation bar. So let's head over to our CSS file. Alright, now the first thing that we want to include is we want to include a certain font type, and the one we're going to be including is Poppins, but we need to get it from an external source. So we're going to be accessing, and we're going to be getting this from Google Fonts, which provide many various font types for free. They also provide font weights, several various font weights, depends on the font, and it also they also provide flexibility, so you could include the link in your HTML file or your CSS file, which is pretty convenient. So we're just going to search in our Google browser or whatever browser you're using, your searching browser, Google Fonts, and the one we're going to be using is Poppins. So all we need to do is click on Get Font, and we can get all of the font weights. Now we want to include this in our CSS file, so we're just going to be copying this code, and we're going to paste this in our CSS file. Otherwise, you can also include all of this code in your HTML file, but it has to be stored in the head element. Alright, so next we're going to be including a selector, and this asterisk basically selects all of the elements in the document. And what we want to do is we want for all of the elements in the document to have these certain properties that we're going to be adding now. So first of all, we want to remove any spacing, any default spacing that there may be. So margin is basically spacing that is outside an element or surrounding an element. It's outside the elements box. And now another thing is we want to also exclude any padding, default padding space that an element may have. So padding is basically spacing that is within or inside an element, and we don't want any defaults, so we're going to set it to 0 as well. And then last thing is we want all of our elements to have this certain font family, this font type, and we're going to be including the external font that we got, which is Poppins. So this is the name, and we should write it as it is with a capital P. And then just in case the external font cannot be loaded, then we'll have to use a built-in font type. So we're just going to go with sans serif, because at least that's prettier than Times New Roman. Alright, so that looks a little bit better than before. So now we're going to be working on our nav element. So we're going to be selecting the nav element, And the first thing is we want to do is we want to specify the background color that we want our navigation bar to have, which is white. Also, another thing is, since we want all of our elements to be in one line and not in one column as it is now, we're going to be using a property called display, and we're going to set this value to flex standing for flexible. So now our navigation bar will be made flexible and we can change the elements as we want. So the first thing that we want to change in our navigation layout is we want to include this property called justify content, and we want all of the elements to be basically spaced out. So the first one should be the first element, the logo should be here, the second element should be in the middle, and the third element should be on the right side, so they should all have space in between. So we're going to be using this value, we're going to be setting justify content to space between. So this sets the spacing between each direct child element. So not all of the elements that are in the nav element, but just the direct child elements, which are the 3 divs that we created before: the nav logo, the nav links, and the div that stores the button. Alright, so now we're going to be using this property called place items because none of the elements are centered. So right now the navigation bar element height, the width is 100%, but the height is basically based on the largest element, which is the nav links. So this nav links basically determines how tall it is, and right now it's up until where it ends. But these 2 elements are not centered, so these 2 elements should be centered vertically. So we're going to be using this place items, which helps us with this, and we're going to set the value to center. So now you can see that these 2 elements are now centered vertically. Another thing is we're going to be including some padding space, so padding inside the navigation element. So we don't want these 2 elements, for example, towards the end to be right at the edge. We just want to include some spacing inside the navigation element. So we're going to be using, and we're going to be setting the padding space. So for the first value, we're going to be setting it to 15 pixels. We're going to be adding 2 pixel values. First, we'll set it to 15 pixels. So the first value basically determines the element's padding space vertically. So the spacing that will be on top and on the bottom. So we're going to set that to 15 pixels. And another thing is we're going to set the left and right spacing to 25 pixels. So the first value has added 15 pixels of spacing inside the top part and the bottom part of the navigation element, and the second property, which is 25 pixels, has added 25 pixels both in the left, 25 pixels in the left side of the inside the nav element and inside the right side. So now you can see that the elements are off the edges. So now we can move on to adding a little border. Okay, so basically each and every element in a document is a rectangle. So this text is a rectangle, every list item is a rectangle, anchor tag, button, all elements in a HTML document is basically a rectangle or a box, so including the nav element. And right now the nav element box starts from the edge, so right over here on top, until the bottom. But then since we've added 15 pixels of spacing at the bottom, so the nav ends somewhere over here due to the 15 pixels of spacing. And widthwise, the nav element is still at the edge. We did not add any margin spacing, only padding space inside. So the nav element also starts from here until the end. So if we include a little border to see what I mean, you can see that basically what we did is we outlined the nav element box, because each element has a box but they're all invisible. So right now we set the nav elements box outline to be displayed. So right now what we want to do is we want to add border bottom property. So we only want the border bottom to be shown. So simply we're just going to change this to be set only to the bottom part. So only the bottom part of the nav element box should be displayed. But also we want to change a few properties of the border. So first of all, the 1 pixel that we added determines how thick the border is, or how thick the line is basically, and we set it to 1 pixel, so it's very thin. We also set the value to a solid, so we don't want any spacing in between. So for example, there are different types of styling that the line could have. For example, dotted will cause the line to be sliced multiple times, so you can see that there's spacing in between, but that's not really pretty in my opinion. So we're going to set this to solid, which is often used. So we want the line to be opaque and straightforward. And also we're going to add one more property. We're going to change the color of the border. Right now by default it's set to black, but we want to change this to a very light color, so we're going to set it to 235. So you can see it's so light you might see it if you zoom in, but it's very light, and that's what we want it to be, because we don't want the users to notice the border. We don't want it to be completely invisible where they can't tell where the nav element ends. But we added the border so that they know that this part is the nav element, and then anything that is below is basically all of the other elements in the body, other than the nav element. Alright, so now we're going to be working on the first child element of the nav element, which is the nav logo. So we assign this first child element to an ID called nav logo. So in order to select an ID in a CSS file, we're going to select it with the hashtag character and then the name of the ID, and in our case we named it nav logo, so we copy it as it is. And then inside this element, basically we're going to be adding a little logo image. We're going to be designing this very soon, and it's going to be a square with round corners, and it's going to be orange. So the logo is going to be right next to the text, and however the direction of elements by default is always a column. So we want to use display flex in order to change the flex direction to a row. So we're going to use a flexible layout in order to achieve this. We haven't seen it yet since we haven't added the logo. And then we also want to make sure that the logo, the elements of the logo are placed to the center vertically. So for example, the logo will be a little bigger than the text, but we don't want it to be on top. We want it to be at the center next to the logo. Alright, so now we're going to be working on the logo design, but if you've included an image for your logo, then you can skip this step. However, you can add the width and height properties in your CSS file by calling out the logo, the name of the ID that we use, which is logo image. So inside our logo image, again, it's an ID, so we selected it with a hashtag. So we want our logo to have a background, an orange background color. So we're going to set this to a color combination that I found was really pretty. And we're also going to set the same color for the button as well. Another thing is we want to set the width and height properties. So we want it to be a square, so we're going to set this to 50 pixels in width and height. And now you can see a square, but we want the corners to be a little round. So we're going to change the border properties, and basically what we want to do is change the border radius property, and basically determines how round the border will be, or the corners will be, and we want to set this to 10 pixels. So now it has been curved by 10 pixels, and I think that looks decent and nice as a logo. However, it's really simple since this is only for demonstration purposes, since our main focus is on our drop-down menu. Alright, so now we're going to change the text. We want to include some spacing between the logo and the text, and we don't need to create any class or any ID since the span element is the only element. I mean, this is the only span element in the nav logo parent element or container, so we're going to just select the span element by using the ID nav logo. So we're going to select the parent container, which is nav logo, and then we're going to select the element that we want to modify and design, change, add properties, which is the span element. So anything that we add inside will only affect the span element. So now we want the spacing between the logo and the text to be of 12 pixels. So the span element is at the right, so we're going to add margin left spacing, and we're going to set it to 12 pixels. Font size, we're going to make it really big, so we're going to set it to 25 pixels. And then the font weight, which affects how thick text will be. So the higher the font weight, the more thick. So for pop-ins we have different font weights defined here. Oops. So there's 100, which is very, very thin, 200 up until 900, which is very, very thick. Now we are going to set the font weight to about 600, which is pretty close to 900, the thickest a font or text can be, but we don't want it to be too thick. So now when we see our logo, it looks good, but right now it looks too dark. In my opinion, it looks very opaque, and basically we want our navigation bar to look a little soft and nice. So we can make our text a little more lighter by changing it to a very dark gray color. So 5050 is usually a good one. It's really dark gray, so it's almost black, but it's the soft version of black. Alright, so now we're going to be working on our second child element of the nav element, which is the nav lengths. So the first thing that we want to do is set the unordered list property, and we want all of the unordered list of this nav element, and basically anything in the website should also have no bullet point. So we're going to set the list style to none, so that basically removes all bullet points now. because we've added or included two unordered lists, which is the one right after nav links and the one used for our drop down section. So we want none of them to have any bullet point. Now the next thing that we want to select is the nav links, which is basically the name of the child element of the nav links section. So we're going to select this, and because it is an ID, once again we'll select with a hashtag. But now what we want to do is we want to basically change the properties for the unordered list only, but the unordered list of the nav links only. Basically what we want to do is we want to set the home, products, services, and about to be in one line. However, the drop down menu links should not be in one line in a row. It should be in a column. So we're going to use this special character, this special selector, which is a greater than sign, and then we're going to include the element in which we want the to add the properties and change the properties. So this basically selects only the unordered list that is directly after the nav links, or is a direct child of the nav links. So it will not, so anything that we add inside the selector will not change the unordered list inside this drop down, because it is not directly after the nav links. And also you can remember that it is a greater sign because the nav links is the parent element, so it is greater than the child element. So now what we want to do is include a flex layout to make sure that all of the nav links, all of the list items that are in this unordered list specifically, that is right under the nav links, or direct child of the nav links, we want them to be in one line horizontally, so in one row basically. And then we want to make sure that they are all placed around towards the center vertically, so now you can see that they have changed. Alright, so now you might not be able to see clearly, but all of the links are basically next to each other. There's no spacing in between. So let's just say we want everything in our drop down to not be displayed. I'm just going to do this for demonstration. So now you can see that they're all very close together. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that there is spacing between each of these links. So now when we check our HTML page, you can see that all of the list items have a class, but only the list items, the main list items, have a class called nav link. So not the drop down links, but only the main nav links. They all have a class called nav link, and we're going to select this. And because it is a class, we're going to use a different selector. We're going to be using a dot, which is always used to select a class, and then you include the name of the class. And now what we want to do is include margin right spacing, and we're going to set it to 50 pixels. However, we've also added spacing towards the end, towards the last elements, but we don't need the last element to have 50 pixels of spacing when there's nothing next to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a pseudo class called not. So we want to make sure that the last element does not have any margin right spacing, or does not inherit this property basically. So inside this pseudo class, we're going to include a bracket. So now we can include another pseudo class. So we want to make sure that this property margin right spacing is applied to all of the nav links except or not the last child. And the last child is basically, the last element. So now when we quickly check our, when we click on inspect element and when we check the spacing, you can see that home has margin right spacing of 50 pixels, products has spacing of 15 pixels, services except about. So that works in our favor. Now the next thing that we're going to do is change the color, because the anchor tag's text color by default is blue or purple, and it has an underline which we don't want for now. So we're going to select every nav's anchor tag. So every anchor tag in the nav element should have this property. So they should all have a very dark color. So we don't want it to be completely black, but we want it to be a very dark gray. So this is again a light version, or a soft version of black. Another thing is we want to remove the underline, so we're going to set text direction to none. It's usually set to underline by default. And another thing is we're going to add a transition property. So basically for our drop down list items, we're going to be including a transition of color from very dark gray to orange, to basically this color, the color of the website, which is the theme color of the website. So we're going to change from dark gray to orange when a user hovers around any of these drop down menu links. For the main links, it's going to be slightly different. The border bottom should be changed, should be added instead, and we'll also deal with this with JavaScript as well. But for our main nav links, we're going to be including a border bottom color instead. So just like our nav element, but it's going to be slightly thicker and slightly different, and it's going to be the same gray color, and only when the user hovers around, hovers on the link. So right now we're going to set this transition property, and basically what this does is it slows down the transition color from gray to orange. So now we're going to specify the property that we want to change, that we want to smoothen, that we want the transition from dark gray to orange. We want it to slow down, so we want the color property to slow down. So we're going to specify which property should have this transition, and then we're going to specify how long it takes for the transition to occur, and we're going to set it to 0.25 seconds, so it's not too slow and it's not very abrupt either. And the last thing that we're going to include is where this should be applied, whether the user hovers on the link only, or hovers or their mouse goes out of the link, or is it both in and out when the user hovers and when the hover exits the link. So we want it to be both in and out, so we are going to use this property called ease in. So ease in and out. So ease in will be the transition will only be applied when the user hovers on the link. For ease out, it will only be when the user stops hovering, and then for ease in and out, it's for both. And now we're going to be including the hover property. We're going to be including the hover pseudo class. So again, we're going to select the class, and we want this to be only applied to the drop down and to the list items in the drop down class. So the list items in the drop down menu are inside the class called drop down. So back in our CSS file, we're going to select this class, and because it is a class, we'll use a dot. So what this select does is it selects the nav element, and then inside the nav element, it specifically selects all elements with the drop down class, but specifically we want the anchor tag. We want there to be a hovering effect. So when the user hovers on the list item in the drop down class only, then the color should change from dark gray to orange. So now when we check, we can see that the hovering property works. Alright, so now we're going to be including the property, the underline for only the anchor tags that is directly under the nav link, or the direct child of the nav link, and not the great grandchild, but only the direct child of the nav link class. So again, we're going to select the nav link class, and again we're going to use this greater sign character in order to select only the child element that is directly after the nav link or inside the nav link and after the nav link class. And then what we're going to do is we're going to include some underline when the user hovers on the link. So instead of using text decoration where the values are limited, we're going to be using border bottom instead. So once again, every element is a box, and when we set the border bottom or any border property to a certain pixel and color, then the outline of that box is shown, but we only want the bottom part of the box of each anchor tag box to be shown. So we're using the border bottom property. Now we're going to make our border really thick, so we're going to set it to 2 pixels. We want the border to be really nice and thick. However, the thing is, we want it to first be transparent. The color should change only when the user hovers on the link. And we're doing this because we want to add a transition property. We want the transition from transparent to orange to be visible, to be noticed. So over here, next we're also going to add the transition property once again, and we want the transition property to be applied to the border bottom, but now we specifically want it to be applied to the border bottom color. So that is also a property in CSS. So we want to create a transition from transparent to orange, and we want it to go by 0.25 seconds once again, and we want it both ways when the user hovers around the text or the link and when the mouse exits the link. Alright, so now we want the nav link to again specifically select only the link is a direct child of the nav link. So we are going to set the border bottom color to orange. So now you see, so basically we did not set the border bottom color, but because we have set it with border bottom, it is set to transparent. And then when the link is being hovered, then we want this border bottom color. So in here it's already set to transparent, and we use border bottom to set this color to set the border bottom color to transparent. And then when the user hovers around the link, this color should change to orange. So now when we hover around the link, you can see a beautiful transition from transparent to orange and orange to transparent. And also you can see a beautiful change in color when the user hovers around the drop down menu text and exits. Alright, so now one more thing that we're going to do is we're going to add some font weight, because at the moment the links look a little thin. So this is optional. If you think it's thin, then let's add this font weight. If you think it's alright for now, then you can skip this step. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to add a font weight property in the nav a selector. So this basically selects all of the links, and we want all of the links to have a font weight of 500, so that's going to be a little thicker than previous. Alright, so now we are going to be working on our drop-down menu. So we are going to be working with the class drop-down itself, and that's going to be acting as a container, and it will be responsible for the positioning of the drop-down menu. The unordered list, which carries all of the links directly, is going to be responsible for the design of the drop-down menu, basically. So now let's head over to our CSS file, and we're going to create a new selector. And because drop-down is a class, we've added a dot. So first of all, we want to make sure that our drop-down menu is not really part of our HTML page. It is still technically part of our HTML page, but it's not part of the documents flow. So you're going to do this by setting the drop-down menu to fixed. So now you can see that in the navigation bar, we only have the logo, the links, the main links, and the button set. That's what the document considers to be part of the document. But right now the document considers that these other links, these drop-down menu links, are not really part of the document. So the document essentially ignores it, and the navigation bar now ends here. Alright, so right now the drop-down menu is where it is supposed to be. It is right below the links that we placed it in. So right now what we're going to do is add some padding top spacing so that there is a little more spacing between the main links and the drop-down menu links. So we're going to add this padding top property. So this only adds spacing on top, but it doesn't add spacing outside the drop-down menu, but inside the drop-down menu. So there'll be spacing between the edge, the top edge of the box of the drop-down menu, and the elements inside the drop-down menu. So we're going to add some padding spacing of 12 pixels. So now when we see a layout of how the padding space looks like, you can see that there is a spacing between the edge, the top edge of the drop-down menu, and the elements inside. Okay, so the reason why we're adding a padding space rather than margin space is because we want the drop-down menu to be as close as it can be with the main links, because at the moment, even though the elements of the drop-down menu are further from the main links, the drop-down menu and the main links are still close, and that is going to be really essential in our JavaScript function that we're going to add later on. So right now, let's remove this outline, as that was just for demonstration, and now we're going to add a property. We're going to add opacity, and this basically hides everything. It sets all of the elements to have to be transparent, basically. Okay, so this is obviously not good practice because the links are still available. They're still in the web page. However, they're only hidden. They're set to transparent, but they're still there. So when the user simply clicks on a link, then they're taken to a different page that they were not planning on visiting, and that is absolutely not good practice because they have no idea that there are any links here, and that clicking on this random space could lead them to a different site or a different page. So we're going to remove this option. So the drop-down links should only be clicked on and can only appear when the main links are over there, and that we're going to be setting with JavaScript. But for now, we're going to be adding a CSS property called pointer events, and what pointer events does is it determines whether an element reacts to any mouse event or not. So we're going to be setting this to none. So the mouse event could be either an element is being clicked, the element is being hovered on, the element is being hovered up. So when the user hovers around an element, and when the user's mouse exits from an element, etc. So with this set to none, the drop-down menu cannot be interactive, as without the pointer events, you can see that the drop-down menu is interactive as the mouse changes from. You can see that the drop-down menu is being interactive since the mouse changes from normal to a pointer. And that is because of the anchor tags, the tag elements, basically the links that we added. The anchor element basically it has a CSS property called cursor, and it's set to pointer by default, so the mouse changes by default. So we don't want this change. We don't want the elements in the drop-down menu to be affected by any mouse or by any mouse change or by the user. So we're going to add the pointer events back, and we've set this to none. So when the user now hovers around this spacing, this random spacing here, you can see that nothing changes, that the user is not able to interact with the drop-down menu. The cursor does not change from outer to pointer. So the drop-down can only be interacted with when the menu links are being hovered So now the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a transition property once again, because we want our transition from a drop down menu being appearing to disappearing with opacity. We want this to be a smooth transition. So simply we're just going to add this the property that we want the transition to occur in, and we want it to be within 0.25 seconds. And then we also want it both ways, when the user hovers around the drop down menu and when the user stops hovering around the drop down menu. So we're going to use ease in and out once again. Alright, so now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add an active class to the drop-down menu, and this active class can only be added with JavaScript. So it should not be a part of the classes in this div by default. However, it should be added with JavaScript only, and only when the user hovers around the main links. So when the user hovers around the main links, we're going to set this with JavaScript. Only then can the drop-down menu appear. So we're going to set opacity to none, and the pointer events can be reset or can be back to normal. So any click or any hover event is noted, and the user can basically interact with the drop-down menu. Alright, so now we're going to be designing our drop-down menu, and as we said previously, this only acts as our container where it is positioned, the layout. So now we're going to be working with the unordered listing, which basically we're going to use this to design our drop-down menu. So in order to select this unordered list, since it is the only unordered list in this drop-down class, we're going to be selecting it with its parent elements, the drop-down class, and then we're going to select the unordered list element, the element that we want to modify at the moment. So right now, we're first going to set we're going to set the background color of the drop-down menu to be white. Next thing is we want a box shadow to appear. So right now we'll just set this to auto, and we'll set this to 1 just so you can see how the drop-down menu will look like. So right now you can see that they are both set to white, so you can see that that the border bottom of the nav element is not really seen in front of the drop-down menu. You can see that it looks like it appears to be behind the drop-down menu. Another thing is we're going to add a box shadow. So basically it outlines the drop-down menu, and this basically adds a shadow to this element. Alright, so we're going to be setting 4 properties. Basically, the first property will determine whether the box shadow appears towards the left and the right, and we want neither the left and right. So the right side being positive, the left side being it will be a negative value and in pixels. But if the box shadow were to appear at the right side, then it would be positive. But we don't want it to be towards the left or the right, so we're going to set this to 0. But we want the box shadow to appear a little lower, so we're going to be setting the second property, which determines whether the box shadow appears on top or on the bottom of the element. So a positive value will set the box shadow below the element, but if it was a negative value, then it would be above the element. But we want it to be below the element, so we'll set it downwards. We'll set it to a positive num value. Now the third value is how blurry the box shadow looks like, basically. So you can see that before it looked very opaque, it looked very rigid, but right now we've set it to 15 pixels, so basically the higher the value, then the more blurry the box shadow is. So when it's set to 0, it has no blurriness at all. The pixels are not spread out properly, but the higher the value, the more the pixels are spread out, or the more blurry the box shadow looks like. So we're going to set this to 15 pixels. Alright, and now the last thing that we're going to change is the color of the box shadow. So at the moment it's black, and it's going to stay black, though you can change the box shadow to any color that you want it to be. So right now we just want the box shadow to appear a little more transparent and a little less black than it appears to be at the moment. So we're going to use this RGB value, but now this time we're going to add a different value, which is called alpha, and this basically determines how transparent the element will be. And right now we want the box shadow to have this transparency, so it determines how transparent the box shadow will be. So right now we're going to set the box shadow to be black, but we're going to add one more property. So basically this alpha value is basically like opacity. When it is set to 0, then the opacity value the value is transparent, then that means the box shadow is completely transparent, so you can't see the box shadow. When it's set to 1, it is not transparent, it is fully visible 100%. If we set it to 0.5, you can see that the box shadow is also slightly transparent, and it looks less black than it was before. And we want to create a soft looking navigation bar, so we're going to reduce this value to 0.15, so the box shadow is not so so obvious, but you can still tell that there is a slight box shadow. So it creates, you can still tell that the drop down menu looks a little 3D. It basically gives a 3D effect, and that's what we want it to be. And we don't want it to be too obvious, but the user should be able to tell that the drop down menu has a 3D, has a box shadow, or it looks more 3D. We can also change the color of the box shadow, so it doesn't have to be necessarily only black. It could be, if we wanted the box shadow to appear even lighter, then we can set it to a higher value, a lighter value. Perhaps we can set it to 155, and you can still see the box shadow still appears, but now it is just lighter than before. But you can also set it to different colors, such as we can set it to the color of the theme of the website, which is orange. So we can use this, and it basically creates a glowing effect, and that is if we perhaps increase the value, will it look even better. So you can decide on how you want your drop-down menu to look like, but for now we're just going to set this to a darker value. So right now we're going to add this width property, and we're going to set it to, we want the width of the drop-down menu to be 200 pixels. However, we're going to be adding some padding spacing, and we're going to set this to a padding spacing of 15 pixels. But that basically enlarges, basically increases the width of the drop-down menu, so it's no longer 200 pixels, but it is 200 plus 30 pixels because of the padding space we added towards the left side and the right side. So if there are 15 pixels towards the left and right, then that means there's 30 pixels in total plus the width property that we added, which is 200 pixels. So in order to keep the width to only stay 200 pixels, obviously we want it to be, we're going to use this property, which basically acts as a calculator. So we can add any arithmetic expression inside this property. So basically we can create an addition, expression, subtraction, multiplication, division, any of that. So right now we just want to reduce the width size, because the actual width size is 200 plus the 30 pixels of padding spacing in total. So we want to ensure that the width is only 200 pixels, so we're going to reduce all the extra pixels, the extra width from the padding space. So towards the left and right there are 15 pixels in each side, so altogether it's 30 pixels, which is why we subtracted it by 30 pixels. Now the last thing that we're going to add is we want our border, the border of the drop-down menu, to look a little more round, because at the moment it looks too rough. And so we're going to set the border radius to 10 pixels. So now that looks way better. Alright, so there is still spacing needed between each of these list items inside the drop-down menu, inside the drop-down element. So right now we're going to use the drop-down parent element in order to select the list items, but only the list items in the drop-down class. So right now we're going to be adding padding spacing between all of these list items. So all of these list items should have spacing of 10 pixels. So right now, as you can see, you might probably think that the padding spacing would affect the width of the drop-down menu. However, because its parent element already, the width of the parent element of the list item has been set, then that means the padding space cannot affect the width of the drop-down box. So for example, if we removed this width property and the width was set to be automatic, and let's say we increased the padding space to 50 pixels, you can see that the the width of the drop-down box increases. So, but if we go back, and if the width has been set by its parent element and we increase the padding space to 50 pixels, you can see that the width of the drop-down menu has not changed. Only the height has changed, and that's because we did not set the height here. It's set to automatic, but because the width has been changed, the width of the drop-down box has not been affected. But we only want the padding space to be of 10 pixels. And also, I think it would be great if we increase the width by 20 pixels. And now we're going to move on to our navigation button, since we have not modified this yet. So now we're going to select our navigation button. Since it's the only button in our navigation bar, we'll just select it with its parent element, which is nav. So right now we'll set the background color of the button, and we want it to be orange, and the same theme color orange that we've added in for the logo. So it should basically be the theme color of the website, which is this particular shade of orange. Next, we want the text inside the button to be white, as black makes it too dull. Now we want our border, we want the border radius, or basically the corners of our button, to be slightly more round. So we'll set it to 3 pixels. You can increase that value. Another thing is we want to increase the padding spacing, the spacing inside the button. So there should be spacing between the edge of the button and the text content inside the button. So we'll set the top and bottom padding space to 10 pixels. So for that, you can see only spacing between on top of the elements in the button and on the bottom below, but inside the button. But we also want left and right spacing, and we don't want it to be 10 pixels as well, but we'll set this to an even larger value of 27 pixels, so it looks a little more wider. Another thing is we want to remove the border that the button includes. We don't want it makes it too dark. Another thing is we're going to set the font size to be 14 pixels, so it shouldn't be too big and it shouldn't be too tiny either. And then we're going to set the font weight of the text to be 500, so it should be slightly more bolder than it is currently. And we also want to transition, so we want the user to be able to see a transition of color of the button from orange to a slightly lighter orange. So now we can specify which property we want the transition to occur in, which is the background color. We want the transition to be in 0.4 seconds, and one is in both ways, when the user hovers around the button and when the user's mouse exits the button. So we're going to add ease in and out. So now we're going to add the hover property. So again, we're going to select the button, and this time we're going to add the hover pseudo class. And so this property that we're going to add will occur when the user hovers on the button. So basically, we want the background color to change to a slightly lighter orange color. So I found a really good shade of orange that is slightly lighter than the current orange color that we have here, which is 247, 169, and 125. So now when the user hovers around the button, you can see the color of the button changes from an orange, a darker orange to a much more cooler orange. Alright, so now one more thing that we're going to change in our button is we want to add a pointer effect. So when the user hovers around the button, the cursor should change to a pointer instead. So we're going to head over to our button, and we are going to add the cursor property, and we're going to set this to a pointer. So now when we hover around the button, we can see that the cursor changes to a pointer instead, or to a hand. Alright, so now our CSS side is done as well. So we can see that we have changed and we have created a logo design. We have changed the color text to not be completely black, but a softer version of black, really dark gray. We've also added a transition, and we've also added an underline for all links. All main links, but for drop-down links, we have added instead a text color change, and everything is smooth as we have added transitions everywhere from the underline down to the links, and as well as the button as well. So now we're going to be working on our JavaScript side of the navigation bar. But first, let's set these drop-down menus to none, to 0. We're going to set the opacity back to 0 as we set it to 1 just for demonstration and just so we could see how our drop-down menu would look like. So now back to our drop-down, we're just going to set the opacity to 0, and we also don't want any change to occur. We don't want any cursor change. We don't want the user to be able to click on a link. Nothing. If a user clicks on a link, the web page, the user should not be taken to a different web page. So no mouse events should occur. So we're going to set pointer events to none as well. So now when we try and click on the open space, on the space in where the drop down occupies, we can see that nothing happens. It's still there. It's just transparent, and pointer events have been disabled. Alright, so now our navigation bar looks really nice, complete, and it looks really neat. So now we're going to be working on the JavaScript aspect of our navigation bar. So we're going to head over to our HTML file, and in our head tag element, we're going to include a tag element called script, and this is where we'll be including all of our JavaScript code. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to add an event listener to the document, and we want to ensure that any changes that we make, which is adding a drop-down menu only when a user is hovering on a drop-down link, we want all of that to be processed only once all of the elements in the document, the structure, the layout of the document has been processed and has been loaded. So we're going to add an event listener to our document. So in order to call document, you just simply call it by its name, and then you add the event listener, and we want the event listener to be DOM content loaded. So this event listener will check if everything in the document, from its structure, the elements itself, the layout, if everything has been loaded in the document. And if everything has been loaded in the document, then we're going to add an R function, and basically inside this R function is where we will be including our actual logic of how the navigation bar should behave when a user hovers around the nav drop down links. You can also go with a normal function as well. That can also work, but personally I like to use our functions because it's just easier to create. Alright, so I just realized that the event that we want to add is not called DOM content listener but DOM content loaded. So it ensures that all of the elements and the content inside our document is fully loaded. So now we can create a variable and we'll call it lists. So this variable should basically store all of the elements in our HTML file that has the drop down link class, because only all of the list items, all of the main list items have a class called navlink, but the ones with the drop down menu has a class called drop down link. So basically we're going to ask the document to search specifically for this class, and since there's more than one that has this drop down link class, we're going to use query selector all, so that will select all of the elements with the drop down link class. If we kept it to query selector, then it would only select the first element with the drop down link class that it can find, but we want all of the elements with the drop down link class. And then we include the selector, and the way we select items in JavaScript is the same exact way that we select items in CSS. So since the drop down link element is a class, we are going to use a dot and then include the name of this class called drop down link. So since it has selected more than one element, we are going to be using a for each loop so that it processes each of these elements individually. It adds event listeners and all of the necessary changes individually. So we're going to first call the variable lists or the array, and we're going to include a for each loop. And now inside this for each loop, we're going to include an arrow function. So inside this arrow function, we'll include all of our logic and event listeners. And basically, for each loop, in order to basically represent the current item that is being processed, so whether it be the first element or whether it be the second element, we have to define the variable name, which will basically represent the current element that the for each loop is processing. So it could be any name that we want it to be. I think li is a simple variable name. It could be any name that you'd want it to be. So it basically stores the current element that is being processed. So now let's create a new variable, and we're gonna call it link. Alright, so right now we wanted to select the link elements, the anchor tag elements in our drop down link class. So we're going to again, li basically represents the current elements that is being processed, and it can be any name that you want it to be. It could be L or I, J, K, or DL, anything that you want it to be. So we're going to select the elements that is currently being processed, and we want to add a query selector so that it searches for this particular element, but only the particular elements that is in this element. So not throughout this whole document, but the elements that is in this drop down link element. So we wanted to search for an anchor tag, but only the anchor tag in this element that is not basically a child element of the drop down class. We don't want any of these anchor tags, because we want the event listener, we want the drop down menu to appear only when the user hovers on these main links and not on any of these drop down menu links. So just like in CSS, where we created a selector that ensured that only the elements, all of the main link elements included margin right spacing, but only the last child, in our case about, would not include any margin right spacing, because it won't be necessary since there's nothing next to the last child. So we've included this margin right spacing except to the last child that has the navlink class. So we're going to do this a very similar thing in JavaScript. So we're going to select the anchor tag in our drop down link elements that is not a part of the drop down class. So simply we want the anchor tag that is not a part of the drop down class. So this selector specifically would select all of these anchor tags, that is in, because they're all inside the drop down class, but we have specified that we don't want any of these anchor tags, but the other anchor tag, or basically the anchor tag that is not nested inside the drop down class. So now we're going to create a new variable, and we're going to call it drop down simply, and this will basically store the drop down menu. And we're going to use this drop down element so that we can use this to add the active class, because when we scroll down, you can see that the active class has the properties to basically cause the drop down menu to appear. So it has the opacity value set to 1, which basically means that the drop down menu will be fully transparent, and the pointer events will be automatic. So when the user clicks on any link in the drop down menu, it should work as normal. They should be taken to a different page, or the mouse should turn into a pointer. So we want to add this active class but only when the link is being hovered on. So again, we are going to select this drop down element, but only the drop down elements, not in the whole document, but only in this list item that is currently being processed in our for loop. And the name of this element has a class called drop down. Alright, so now we can add an event listener to the current elements that is being processed in our for each loop. And basically the event that we want it to listen for is for any hovering event. And in order to listen for any hovering effect in JavaScript, it is called mouse over. There's also another event that listens for any hover, which is called mouse enter. But basically this one is a little more limited, and we will see why very soon. But mouse over is much more beneficial for our case. It's much more relevant, and it is much more user friendly in our case. So now we're going to create an arrow function once again. So if the list item is being hovered on, or the mouse is over on the list item, then we want the drop down menu to have the active class, and we want it to appear. And in order for it to appear, it needs to have these two properties, and these two properties will override these two properties here, so the drop down menu should appear. So we're going to call the drop down element variable which has stored the drop down element, and we're going to add a class. And in order to add a class, we need to first call the class list property, and then we're going to add this class called active. And we don't need to add a dot in order to add this class, because it assumes that it is a class anyways. So it has basically modified the classes in our drop down element, and it has specifically added this active class. Alright, so now this function should work for now. However, we'll see why we cannot end here, because we'd have to add a different event listener. So now our function should work, and we should basically be able to see our drop down menu when the link is being hovered on. So now we can see our drop down menu. However, another thing that we want to change, we want to keep, is this underline. So basically, while this link is being hovered on, we want this underline to remain there even if we are hovering on the drop down. So in order to do this, well, we have called our link that is not a part of the drop down menu, which is basically this link here, or if it's this, we have stored as a variable called link. So we're going to use this in order to add a class list, and we're going to add an active class. And basically this link does not have an active class, so when we scroll up, we can see that all of our nav links have this border bottom color, or this basically underline being added to the links that are specifically right the direct child element of nav link. So basically none of the drop down links are included, but only the links that is right under the nav link. So we're going to include a class this time. We're going to include another selector, and basically this selector will also have the same property. So we're going to basically select the element or the anchor tag that is directly under the nav link, so none of the drop down menus, but only the ones with the active class should have this orange outline as well. So now when we check our page and we hover around the menu links, the nav links, so you can see when the mouse exits the link and it moves to the drop down menu, you can see that it still contains the orange outline. And that is because we have added a class, and we've added this text underline not only when it is being hovered on, when the link is being hovered on, but also if it has the active class. And when it has the active class, this should remain even when it is out of hover. However, we are not done yet, because as you can see, when our mouse stops hovering around the current link, you can still see that the drop-down menu appears, and even when we hover around a different link, the drop-down menu still remains. And obviously this is not user-friendly, so we are going to add another event listener, and this event listener will be basically the opposite of mouse over, which is called mouse. So this basically listens for if the current list item or if the element is no longer being hovered on. So when the mouse basically exits the list item basically. So now instead of adding this active class, all we're going to do is remove these active classes, class instead. Alright, so now when we check our navigation bar, when we check our drop down menu link, and basically when we hover around these menu links, you can see that the drop down menu appears. And when our mouse hovers on the drop down menu itself, you can see that the text underline still stays the same as we specified in our mouse over event listener. And also we can see that when our mouse exits the drop down menu, the whole drop down menu disappears, and basically that's because we added this event listener, so the active class is removed. So the opacity values that we set, which are these two values, which basically determines whether it's transparent, whether it's visible, and whether it has any pointer events, these are removed, and pointer events are set to none. So and also the drop-down menu is no longer visible because because the opacity is now set to 0. So you can see the drop-down menu disappears as well, and same case for the other element as well. So we know that our for each loop has processed these two drop-down links properly and well. Hello, and thank you so much for watching. If you found this tutorial helpful, please give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to Code Harvest and hit the notification bell to stay notified on future tutorials to come. Now see you in the next video. Goodbye.